He walked in on the black caregiver nursing his baby. What he did next: change the house. The cry started clean and thin, a silver wire plucked in the dark. It threaded the hall, slipped under doors, and curled around the marble like a question money couldn't answer. On the 12th floor of a glass tower that watched the river exhale, a monitor bloomed red, "Baby awake." In the nursery, light from the street climbed the white wall in slow, city-shaped ladders. A mobile of tiny paper cranes revolved with the HVAC's whisper, turning luck into a ritual. And Gabriel Hawthorne, the man whose name propped up a tech exchange, a children's hospital wing, and 3 newspapers' Sunday supplements, woke with the panic specific to parents and people whose lives have been reduced to one irrefutable job: go. He moved through a corridor that cost more per foot than some people's years and felt his heart do the old, stupid, holy thing: trip, right itself, trip again. 2 weeks into fatherhood, he had memorized the map of the night: warm bottle, slow sway, the hum that sounded like apology to a person too small to know what sorry is. He had also memorized the way silence can sharpen into dread. The monitor's red stuttered. The cry wavered once, then steadied, then softened. Not stopped, softened, the way storms lose interest. He took the corner fast, foot sliding a whisper on the rug, and stopped because the world, his world, with its budgets, its briefings, its brags, tilted. In the rocking chair by the window, framed by the city's patient glitter, sat Asha. Her head was bowed, her eyes closed as if in prayer or pain, one hand supporting his son's impossibly small shoulders, the other guiding a rhythm as old as hunger. His son, 7 pounds and the future of an entire board's expectations, was latched at her breast, pulling life like it was a right and not a deal. Time misbehaved. Awe and alarm collided in Gabriel's chest with a force that felt like betrayal to both. The baby's fists had unclenched. His eyelids fluttered the way sleep negotiates with appetite. The wet sound of swallow sounded like the first honest thing in a room that had too much expensive quiet. Asha's hair, a thick coiled crown she kept tucked back when the house manager pronounced preferences, had fallen forward, a soft black theater curtain against the baby's cheek. The sight split Gabriel cleanly. A man bent by grief, his wife. Elena had died in that same hospital wing he'd funded. Their son born into the bright, aching tyranny of living, and a man bent by rules, contracts, policies. The document from the domestic agency that had arrived with bullet points about boundaries, hygiene, liability, optics. The word optics arrived with the force of a judge. His throat went dry. The nursery's nightlight colored everything tender. On the dresser, a bottle sat half-made, powder a small drift of snow beside a measuring scoop. The warmer's light blinked its idiot metronome. Somewhere in the tower, a compressor thumped, then hushed, the building's heart remembering its job while Gabriel's forgot. He heard his voice before he felt it. "Asha!" It wasn't a question. It was a drop. She started just enough to tell him she hadn't meant to be caught. She did not pull away enough to end the only mercy happening in the room. Her eyes lifted and pinned him, steady, unashamed, the way trauma nurses look at you when your money has nothing to sell to blood. "He wouldn't take the bottle," she said low, like a confession made to God and a pediatrician. He was gagging. He was turning. His color wasn't right. She swallowed. "I tried the paste method. I checked the nipple flow. I did everything we were taught." He arched and she looked back at the baby as if language might scare him. "He needed down, not plastic. Down, not plastic." The sentence found his ribs and wrote something on them. A memory, Elena at 32, laughing, angry, stubborn, explaining to him, a boy who had become a man before learning how bodies feed, that breasts are not metaphor. He made his voice a tool he could hold without cutting himself. Is it safe?" It was a stupid question, which is sometimes the kind the terrified ask. Asha's mouth tightened 1 degree at the corner. It wasn't contempt, just a note. "I'm nursing my 6-month-old, she said, simple as truth. "I have milk. I have labs in my phone because poor black women learn to carry proof where your word will do. I would never—" Her voice hit a wall of history and climbed it. "I would never risk a baby." The house manager's rules, typed and laminated, flashed in Gabriel's head like a red light you run because you believe you're the emergency. No co-sleeping, no unsupervised feeding, no physical contact beyond comfort. No, no, no. The no was meant to protect liability. It now threatened to punish mercy. And under the policy, a rumor older than any building, the one that says a black woman's body exists to serve, and that if she serves the wrong way, she is a danger. That if she serves the right way, she is invisible. Something hot and shape-shifting, anger, shame, gratitude, fear, pressed behind Gabriel's eyes. "I heard him choke," Asha said, eyes flicking to the bottle, to the baby, to him, always back to the baby. "I made a call. If I'm wrong, I'll leave with my head up. But I won't watch a child aspirate to keep a policy comfortable." Somewhere in him, a board meeting convened, citing headlines. Somewhere nearer, a father stood in a room with a son who was breathing milk and sleep. The father spoke first. "You made the right call," Gabriel said, the words landing between them like a ramp instead of a wall. And he meant it until a new sound came down the hall. A throat clearing, clipped, managerial. The sound a household uses when it wants you to remember which century pays the rent. Gabriel Hawthorne's money wasn't old, but it behaved like it had seen things. He'd built his fortune on a logistics platform that turned chaos into a commodity, boxes traveling in straight lines, trucks that didn't waste gas performing pride, data that predicted what people would need before they learned to want it. The world had thanked him with numbers. Elena had thanked him with a life. She'd been a public defender who smelled like drugstore lotion and moral geometry, a woman who told juries stories that made them remember whose children they once were. When the aneurysm took her in 9 minutes, Gabriel learned there are emergencies money doesn't compete in. He put his grief on a spreadsheet, therapy Tuesdays, cemetery Sundays, donor calls always. He prepared for their son with a zeal that frightened the night nurse at the neonatal ICU. He interviewed nannies with HR questions he later hated himself for asking. He turned a guest room into a nursery that made Pinterest hum hymns. He hired a house manager, white, bristling, discreet, because his friends said words like standards, and his fear said words like control. And he hired Asha because Elena's sister, Soraya, insisted he meet the woman who kept her twins alive the spring everything went sideways. "She's church in a person," Soraya had said. "Competent," she added, the way we do when we know some rooms require credentials printed in different fonts. Asha arrived on a Tuesday with a calm that made the house stop posturing. 30 years old, a registered home health aide who could quote pediatrician blogs and her grandmother with equal authority. She wore her hair in a bun that had survived night feedings and an early bus. She had an infant carrier strapped to her body the way parachutists carry their last best chance. Inside dozed her son Malik. The second that year, Gabriel would meet and decide he owed the world more than dividends. "We can discuss arrangements," Asha said before the house manager could weaponize the word professionalism. "I can separate milk from work. I can pump here if there's a space that's not a bathroom. I will not be away from my baby 12 hours. I learned that lesson the hard way with the agency that said flexibility and meant me, not them." The house manager pursed her lips the way people do when their furniture is disagreed with. Gabriel, watching Asha's spine do math, rent plus bus fare, plus daycare, plus diapers, plus one broken car seat buckle she refused to ignore, said, "We will make space that respects your body. Draw me a schedule that respects your life." In this, he was the man Elena had trained him to be. In other things, he was still practicing. The building knew what he was practicing. The doormen competed to outkind each other when Asha arrived. Warmth performed with the gruffness of men who don't want YouTube to catch them being tender. The elevator knew to pause for her stroller. The other residents, faces smoothed by lasers and time, learned her name, then forgot it in front of each other. The house manager, Lydia, learned to say Asha's name like a title, and then not say it at all if donors were visiting. The rules arrived as a PDF, care protocols. They were built to keep a household clean on paper and safe from lawsuits. They were also a minefield. No comfort beyond approved techniques. No personal items in the nursery. No feeding without explicit instruction. Lydia had crafted them with a lawyer who'd never closed a bottle in the dark. Asha read and initialed where ink demanded. She also made her own list by hand and taped it inside the pantry door where policy couldn't confiscate it. Wash hands, wash hate. Label bottles, label power. Room temp isn't the thermostat, it's the baby. She tracked ounces like a banker tracks interest, spit-ups like weather, diapers like data. She taught Gabriel how to pace a bottle, upright, nipple only half full, breaks where greed takes breath. She corrected his hold without humiliating him, that miracle some women perform around men whose egos advertise hazard. She refused to call him sir because she was not in a novel. She called him Mr. Hawthorne until he asked for Gabriel. Then she said Gabriel when it served the baby and Mr. Hawthorne when the house manager listened. Her own life arranged itself around bus schedules and the price of formula, and the hours grandmother Lurleen could take Malik between her shifts at the assisted living facility. Her partner, the word boyfriend had outlived its usefulness, was in the wind, a text thread with a heart and a habit of silence. She kept receipts and milk. She kept faith the way tired people do, small, specific, fierce. Race ran through the penthouse like electricity, always present, only noticed when someone miswired the fixture. Lydia corrected Asha's grammar twice when Asha was quoting a pediatrician. A donor referred to Asha as the help, and then looked proud of himself for catching the wince he caused and apologized with a tone meant for good dogs. A neighbor asked Asha in the lobby which apartment she was going to, and then asked for ID. Asha handed her a look, not a card. Later, she wrote the incident on her phone as a note with a date. Not to sue, yet. To remember. The power dynamic wore a uniform, but so did competence. On the second night, Asha taught Gabriel the language of cries. Wet, gassy, angry, scared. On the fifth, she taught him to ignore Lydia's sigh when he sang off-key, because the baby loved the mistake. On the sixth, tonight, the bottle clogged its own small throat, the baby gagged, and Asha, trained by 1,000 midnight pivots and one grandmother who used to wet nurse in St. Mary Parish when formula was a rumor and maternity leave a joke, made a call that would put her job and a century on trial at once. Is everything all right? Lydia's voice arrived before her body, as if propriety had scouts. She stood in the doorway with a tablet like a badge, and the kind of smile that never shows teeth. She took in the tableau, the rocking chair, the latch, the soft suck, the man in sleep-tangled t-shirt with his hands hanging uselessly by rules, and recalibrated her face from hostess to hall monitor. "That is not permitted," she announced softly, a volume engineered to be both private and punishing. Asha didn't flinch. He was choking, she said. He needed a breast, not a bottle. Lydia's lips pressed so thin a line they could have cut paper. "We have hospital-grade formula warming. You will unlatch this instant." The baby's hand, a starfish with one missing ray, opened and closed, a vote of no confidence in adults. Gabriel took one step toward the chair and made a decision that would end 3 friendships and start 5. "No," he said, and the word shocked him with its steadiness. "We do not interrupt a successful feed." Lydia's eyebrows climbed as if money had just misspelled itself. "Mr. Hawthorne, think of the headlines." She glanced meaningfully toward the ceiling as if drones nested in chandeliers. "A domestic employee—" Asha's head lifted, eyes suddenly the color of polished stone. "A person," she said. "You can say that word here." Lydia recalculated and reached for a weapon beloved by cowards. Policy. "Insurance will not—" "Insurance will not save a baby," Asha said, voice measured. "Milk will." Gabriel felt the scale in his chest, optics on one side, oxygen on the other. He pictured a boardroom, a donor's eyebrow, a whisper in a club where drinks cost rent. Then he pictured Elena in a cheap kitchen, reading about enslaved women forced to nurse their owners' children while their own went hungry, and how she'd cried an angry, quiet cry and told him, history does not end, it mutates. He looked at Asha and saw not history repeating, but history rewritten by consent, competence, urgency. "Lydia," he said, turning, Your job tonight is to call Dr. Bell and confirm what we both know, that wet nursing is not a crime and that supervised, informed, temporary breastfeeding in an emergency is not only permitted, it's sane. After that, your job is to apologize to Asha for calling her anything but what she is. The person who kept my son from aspirating while I was in a hallway with my hands empty. The room tilted a second time, this time toward a gravity he liked. Lydia blinked the way people do when power moves without their permission. She didn't apologize, not yet. She left, phone already weaponized, and Asha exhaled the smallest retained breath. Gabriel crouched beside the chair, low, reverent as a penitent. "Do you need water?" he asked, the most human thing a man can ask a woman doing an ancient job in his fancy house. "Yes," she said, softer now that she didn't have to hold up the ceiling alone. He brought it. She drank. The baby resumed his working, furious peace. Upstairs, the city continued to applaud itself. Down the hall, Lydia's voice could be heard shaping the words urgent and liability into a performance for a pediatrician who had caught Gabriel crying in a hallway at 3 a.m. and had not told anyone with a camera. Asha spoke without looking at him. "I know what this looks like," she said. "I know the story they want to tell about me. I know how many centuries are in this room. I also know that I would do it again, and I will take my box of baby things and my boy and go if you think this house cannot abide what I did." Gabriel stared at the crown of her head and realized he had been born into a world where his worry becomes policy, and she had been born into a world where her competence becomes suspicion. He thought of Elena texting him an article about maternal mortality rates, the line graph a knife. He thought of the time a waiter poured him more wine and asked Asha to refill the water in the same movement because uniforms teach some men which way to pour. He thought of the small, sharp way Asha said person. "I think this house will change," he said finally. "Starting now." Lydia returned with a tablet like a gavel. Dr. Bell confirms passive immunity is a benefit. She recommends documentation. She also requests that we refrain from ad hoc. "We will document," Gabriel said. "You will draft a policy that differentiates emergencies from overreach, consent from coercion, person from position. And you will remove the sentence about physical contact beyond comfort. It reads like a threat to anyone who has ever been touched for a paycheck." Lydia opened and shut her mouth twice, a rare performance of uncertainty. "Yes, Mr. Hawthorne," she said brittly. "Of course." And then, as if the night hadn't had enough choreography, the elevator chimed. Because even at midnight, donors arrive uninvited if they think your grief makes you free. Two figures stepped into the foyer with umbrellas that dripped entitlement. Garrett and Maeve Ellison, bored darlings, legacy donors, a pair who believe generosity is better if it's seen. They had texted earlier, "We're near, drop by?" Gabriel had not answered because some silences are a boundary. The elevator, which took its orders from the concierge as much as from consent, let them up anyway. They wove through art that had been given nice names and arrived at the nursery like the third act of a play. Maeve clocked the scene in one glance, black woman nursing white billionaire's baby, and went pale the way only people unused to shame can. Garrett's face did something uglier. It smirked. "Well," he said brightly, too loudly, "someone's embracing the natural way." Asha did not cover herself. She did not perform modesty for people who had barged into a room they hadn't earned. She adjusted, efficient as any professional at any task, and kept feeding a human. Maeve recovered with a kind of weaponized concern. "Is that safe?" She looked at Gabriel as if he were the one to certify safety here. "Optics, darling!" The word optics ricocheted off the mobile and landed in the trash. Gabriel stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not use the power he had learned from rooms like theirs, the one where volume equals victory. "You are in my home uninvited," he said. "You have entered a nursery unannounced. And you have just made a person doing an act of rescue feel like a scandal. There will be no optics conversation in front of my son at my employee's breast." Maeve flushed for real now. "We're family," she began, meaning donors. Garrett's smile ticked wider. "Media would have a field day," he said, "if an agency wanted to spin this. You should think about that." Asha's laugh was a low, unamused chord. Media had a field day when my cousin died giving birth because the hospital didn't believe her pain, she said. This is not that day. But if you'd like to talk about optics, we can discuss whose hands are clean and whose are merely photographed. Garrett's smirk flickered. He was not used to being told his hands had jobs beyond shaking. Lydia hissed a warning at everyone and no one. Please, she said crisply, let's relocate to the sitting room. No, Gabriel said again, discovering he liked that word in this room. If the donors have something to say, they will say it to the person whose body they are attempting to regulate by proxy. Maeve tried to recalibrate into empathy, the way some people switch apps. We only worry about vulnerability, she said, eyes lingering on Asha's skin in a way that told on her. Asha did not blink. Your worry finds women like me and calls itself safety, she said. It isn't. Safety would have been a 6-week paid leave law when my son was born. Safety would be a city where I don't carry my STI panel in my phone in case a cop demands paperwork because I nursed a white child in a park. Safety is a policy. Concern is a pose. Silence arrived with chairs for everyone. The baby released with a soft pop that lower animals and higher gods both understand. Asha burped him, patient, patted, waited, relatched to the second breast with the mechanical grace of someone who has fed life at 3 in the morning and 5 and 7 while buses were late and rent was timely. Dr. Bell texted Lydia, please tell Mr. H I recommend a formal emergency protocol. And good call by caregiver. Lydia read it and felt her spine take notes. Garrett decided to try a new tactic, money. You know, he said faux casual, if a video leaked it would be complicated. People would misunderstand. We could manage it. If we handle this discreetly. The pronouns did all the crimes. Gabriel took a step so small no one noticed and landed in a different decade. Elena beside him in a courthouse hallway, whispering what justice looks like when it's not performing. He looked at Asha, then at his son, who had stopped fighting the world long enough to accept it. He turned to Garrett and said something that would cost him and cleanse him. Get out, he said, and accept that your access is not a right but a revolving privilege. You can donate to the wing in my wife's name or you can withdraw. What you will not do is regulate who gets to be a mother in my house. Maeve's mouth made a small O, the shape of people when they encounter consequences for the first time. You're making a mistake, Garrett said flatly. No, Gabriel said softly. I'm correcting one. He reached for his phone. James will see you down. James materialized because good men know how to be summoned by decency. The donors left with umbrellas that no longer dripped entitlement, just water. Lydia stared at the floor as if tiles could forgive her faster than Asha could. I apologize, she said finally, the words dragging themselves out as if unused. I prioritized policy over a person. Asha nodded once, which in some dialects is acceptance, and in others is receipt. Good, she said. Now write a policy that prioritizes people so we don't need to have courage on your job again. The baby finished. The room breathed. The city kept failing and being beautiful on schedule. Gabriel looked at Asha the way men look at maps when they finally admit they're lost. What do you need from me? He asked. Besides apology and money? Asha thought long enough to insult hurry. A promise, she said. That this becomes a protocol that protects the next woman who has milk and sense and the wrong skin for your friend's comfort. And a raise, because I'm doing 2 jobs. He laughed, and the laugh felt like the first real one since Elena died. Done, he said. And then he added the thing he hadn't meant to say. And if you'll let me, I would like to set up a fund in your name for emergency lactation support. Pumps, time off, legal counsel if girls get harassed for feeding babies that aren't theirs with permission and need. Asha stared at him like people do when wealthy men say something useful without asking for naming rights. Not in my name, she said. In Elena's. You loved her. You can show it with a policy that lives longer than a wing. His throat closed around gratitude until it learned how to breathe. The story didn't go viral. It did something better. It went internal. By morning, Lydia had a draft. Emergency Infant Feeding Protocol. V1. It spelled out what Asha and every grandmother already knew. If an infant is in distress and the caregiver is lactating and consents, and the parent or on-call physician confirms verbally, the caregiver may breastfeed while documentation is prepared. No employee will face reprisal for acting in good faith to prevent harm. Racist or sexualized comments about a caregiver's body are cause for expulsion from the premises, no matter their title. The lawyer complained for sport and then conceded because the doctor wrote a footnote that read, "The alternative is a dead baby." Gabriel signed, dated, and posted it where the policy with teeth should live. On the pantry door next to Asha's handwritten rules, and by the entry where donors wipe their optics before they come in. He sent a version to the agency. They balked. He removed them from his payroll and added a note to his calendar titled, "Build Better Pipelines. Hire caregivers like we hire CTOs. References that actually check. Questions that don't punish mothering. Wages with weekends." He called Soraya and told her everything, the way you confess to the one person who already knew what you would do if you grew up on time. Soraya cried a little and then laughed a lot. "Elena would have set that policy on fire if it wasn't written right," she said. "You got close." The Hawthorne Foundation announced the Hawthorne Vale Lactation and Care Fund 3 weeks later with no gala and a website that worked on phones. The grants were boring and fast. Pumps for night shift aides, mini fridges for break rooms, gift cards masquerading as cash, legal help when a manager called feeding indecent, a tiny stipend for a woman to stay home 1 extra week postpartum when her body said no and her boss said now. Applications were in plain English and Spanish and Haitian Creole because Asha had told them where the lines form. The board lost 1 donor and gained 2 nurses who didn't have money but brought receipts and rage and a spreadsheet of needs. The hospital wing added a lactation room with a lock that respected religion and a chair that didn't punish back pain. Gabriel pushed a memo through 3 committees that said consent plus care, optics, and then he made it policy by being the man with the vote. At home, the nursery changed in small, telling ways. The bottle warmer still blinked. The Pampers still devoured budgets. But the rocking chair had a second throw blanket, and the monitor's red was not a panic anymore. It was a suggestion. Lydia learned to say Asha's name, then to say please, then to say nothing when love required silence. She also learned that an apology is not a spell. It's a schedule. She got better at her job because her job got better at people. Asha kept feeding her own son, Malik, and sometimes, when colds ran through the city like gossip, she'd nurse Gabriel's child with his consent and her timing while bottles cooled their temper. They did it like professionals, which is to say, with paperwork and respect and no Instagram. The shock left the house, and in its place arrived something more durable, trust. Outside the tower, the city did what cities do. A taxi driver yelled at a cyclist. A grand jury did the wrong thing. A school made the right call after a community wouldn't shut up. The story of a black woman who fed a white baby travels with a heavy caravan, the memory of stolen labor, the righteousness of consent, the awkwardness of rich houses learning anything, the danger of people who think their money is immoral. But this story also traveled with a smaller caravan, a baby who didn't aspirate, a woman who kept her job with a raise, a policy taped to a pantry that outlived the news cycle, a fund that bought 4 pumps in a week for women who weren't on anyone's newsletter. On a rainy Tuesday, Asha brought Malik to the tower because her mother's bus broke down and life likes tests. Gabriel watched his son stare at Asha's son, 2 small faces trying to compute why the other had their favorite nose. He knelt on the rug and let 2 boys grab his hair with the impunity of kings. Asha sat beside him, leaned back against the dresser, and for the first time since the night that felt like a trial, laughed in his house. "He looks like Elena when he scowls," she said, and it wasn't awkward. It was a link. "He looks like Elena when he forgives," Gabriel said quietly. They didn't make a family. They made a room that wasn't lying. On Elena's birthday, Gabriel wrote her a letter he put in the drawer instead of on Instagram. He told her about the policy and the fund and the fact that he had learned to hold a baby without apologizing to the baby for his hands. He told her about Asha's no-nonsense mercy. He told her about the donors who left and the nurses who arrived. He thanked her for teaching him to measure love in verbs and not posts. He took their son to the park and didn't flinch when he heard a stranger say, "Is that the Hawthorne baby?" Because he had learned to make strangers a background and policy a foreground. Asha, on a bus headed home with Malik's head heavy on her chest, texted her grandmother, "Got a rich man to tape a useful policy to his pantry." Lurline replied with 3 clapping hands and 1 line, "Our milk always saved more than babies." That night, when the cry came, it didn't sound like a wire. It sounded like a bell that called only those who were meant to hear. Gabriel walked the hall with feet that remembered the first emergency and didn't flinch now. A bottle warmed. A policy waited by the door, patient, strong. In the rocking chair, a black woman, not a metaphor, not a scandal. A person, fed a child with permission and skill. And a house that used to worship optics learned to bow to outcomes instead. When a life or death moment collides with a rulebook, do you protect liability or a heartbeat? If consent, competence, and urgency are present, what optics are you willing to let go of so a baby can breathe? And in your workplace or home, what boring, specific policy could you tape to the door this week so the next act of care isn't punished as scandal? If this story moved you, share it with someone who still confuses charity with control. Then do one pragmatic thing. Fund a pump, make a lactation room, rewrite a protocol to turn compassion into infrastructure.